It's that time in life. You want a fancy but fast sports car. And this is where you come to an unusual conundrum. There are not as many choices as one would think on offer. Yes, the 911 is the obvious, but take your pick of excuses. Engine's in the wrong place, or too many people have one. And then there is the Corvette, which was just recently made into something magnificent. But in some circles, how do I put this nicely? Perhaps you're not old enough yet. Which brings us to the Pepsi that is juxtaposed against Zuffenhausen's Coca-Cola, yet this one, an entirely new formula. Okay, I'll admit there was a lot going on in that Open, but there's a lot going on here. This is an entirely new AMG GT, which, if we're honest with one another, has been one of the most credible rivals to one of the most credible sports cars on the planet. So why is this a different formula? Well, it's an entirely new car, but if you look at it, you're thinking to yourself, no, it's not an entirely new car. That's a Mercedes AMG SL with a roof. There, you would be right and wrong. So it is the same platform as an AMG SL. However, this is the story of a lot of small changes, the least of which being the roof. Let's start with really what's powering this thing. No surprise there. It is the 4-liter twin-turbocharged V8. We are driving the GT63 today. However, they do have a GT55 on offer. It's the same engine. It's detuned, and like I said in the SL, the different versions of that one we shot, I don't understand why the two exist, because the difference performance-wise, 0 to 60 on this is 3.1. On the 55, it's 3.8. VMAX 196, on that one it's 183. Now that brings us to a theme you and I are going to be focusing on throughout this entire episode. What are the real differences between this and an AMG SL? Which means we have to get the most obvious out of the way first, and that is the design. And this, it's more than just grafting on a roof to a convertible. The personality has completely been changed. It's more sensual because it has hips to it. And I'm not just saying that because you look at the rear three quarters and you can see the inspiration from 992. Then there's the dimensions of the vehicle. It's still very similar to what it was in the past, which means this is a physically bigger vehicle than a 911. Like, for example, the wheelbase is about 10 inches longer. Now, to understand the rest of the differences, we have to jump behind the wheel. But before we do that, a favor. If you find value in these episodes, could you click subscribe, like, leave a comment? Most importantly, share these episodes with your friends. I hate having to ask you this, but the YouTube algorithm, a bitch. Vielen Dank. Greetings from Sierra Nevada, no, not California, rather España, just outside of Granada. Now that we have the pleasantries out of the way, 4,343 pounds, or depending express your weights and measures, 1,970 kilograms. With that, we are in race mode. So, shall we? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You know what? Let's back off a little bit, because this is an approach to a ski resort. As you can imagine, we are up in the mountains here, and you know the thing you notice immediately here, more than the delivery of power, you notice that roof. Yeah, we'll get to driving dynamics later, but God, it is stunning up here. There's no other way to put this. You immediately know that this is more cohesive. I honestly can't tell you if the tuning is different in the way it delivers power from the SL, but it immediately feels different. It's a combination of the delivery of that engine, and we've experienced it in many different cars before, because that 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 underpins many of the full-fat AMGs. Then you get into the transmission, which is the twin clutch, but the thing you notice here, there's no instance where I feel a denied downshift, so one can push this thing much more aggressively in roads like this. God, this is an unusually good experience. And just kind of as an aside, when they first sent out the invite for this drive, I was like, wow, you're not doing it on a track. Why is that? Now that I'm here, oh, I totally get it. Why, yes, I am well aware it is no fun to discuss practicality on these increasingly rare occasions when we get to experience an all-new performance car. However, one of the big differences between this and an AMG SL, and more importantly between this and the GT that came before it, is practicality. So yes, a hatchback, but this has a back seat and, believe it or not, quite a bit of storage. I hate golf, so I'm never going to give you the 2 golf club example. Rather, I am a 911 owner, and I have taken my 911 recently on a weekend, and it was horrible. There is no storage. This could do more than a weekend. Now that we got the boring stuff out of the way, how shall I put this? This was probably not my best idea. Thankfully, that's out of the way, which means we can focus on the most challenging differentiation between this and an SL, and that would be, how do you channel the air around a car when the roof doesn't go down? One would think that's pretty simple, just graft a roof on it and the air will automatically go around it. Apparently, that's not the case. You see, you have to worry about the high point of the roof. Where it is impacts the efficiency of how the air gets around the car, which impacts the performance of the vehicle. So instead of putting the high point where it usually goes at the top of the windshield, it's more back here, which impacts the overall dynamics of the car. And that brings us to one of the biggest differences in design between this and the SL. Notice the Panamericana grille. That's more open, at least at the bottom, and that reveals shutters that open and close to vary the airflow, not for efficiency, rather for cooling the engine and channeling the air through the car. Then underneath the vehicle, it's flat like a 911, but there is a diffuser that opens and closes to bring air above the covering, so there's like a downforce to the front of the car. That works in conjunction with where the high point of the car is, and then all of that channeling of air culminates in the rear with 2 bits that work in conjunction with one another. First, the active aero spoiler, which has multiple positions, and then the diffuser underneath the vehicle. Okay, that's all great technical mumbo-jumbo, but why is this important? Well, for 2 reasons. Number 1, stability, and frankly, more efficiency going through the air makes for a faster vehicle. So I have already shared with you the major headline here. This with a roof, significantly different experience. But what does that really mean? Over the past many years, we've discussed structure as a big function of cars like this. Really any car, but it's more important in a car like this because you're trying to get the most performance out of a vehicle. One way to do it is to make the suspension dialed in, but that's only as good as the structure it's attached to. The structure itself can't flex. So if you remember when we first looked at the SL, what was it, about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago, they showed us the naked bits of that car. And there's a couple of things that stood out. Like, for example, behind this instrument panel, that's all magnesium. The rest of the structure is aluminum. Then some of the bits that are attached to the structure, those are somewhat exotic materials as well, composite fibers. Then unsprung weight. For example, the brakes, they've been adjusted there. Yeah, the rotors are steel, but the disc chambers, those are aluminum. Now, putting it all together, what the hell does that mean? This is a much more rewarding experience going around corners. The car, I will say, feels a bit bigger than the car it replaces, because I'm thinking now the program is shared with the SL, so it's trying to be more of a GT. But in this mode, it's shocking how aggressive one can push a 4,300-pound car. Now, there's a reason for that. This has the active roll stabilization, but it's not like that of like the GLS 63S. These are coils, double wishbones all the way around. So this is an active roll stabilization plus tuning, and that's probably why we're getting this experience. What's most amazing about it is how flat it goes around corners. That's where it's closest to a 911. And just as the scenery becomes even more stunning, that's when we realize it's not just the structure, it's not just the active roll stabilization. There's also some bits they've done to the back of the car. This, of course, has rear-wheel steering, but not to the level of like the S-Class where it's 10 degrees or 4.5 degrees. It's 2.5 going in situations like under 60 miles an hour or like in parking lots. But then doing this, it's up to 0.7 degrees, and that's where it's so much sharper. So no, it is not that time to play your favorite game and mine, the options game, because we don't have any pricing. But we can take a guess, although this one's going to be more difficult than others. But let's start with the facts. So the AMG SL 63, that's not cheap, 183,000 US base price. The 55, 141,000 base price. The 43, just for grins and giggles, it's about 110,000 base price. Then there's the Coke, the 911. The base price of a basic 911, so we're talking about a 379 horsepower car, very different than this, that's about 110,000. But a Carrera S, that's about 130,000. So that's when we get into the whole idea if you could do the convertible as a premium and more expensive, or you could do the sports car as the premium, more expensive. Porsche, they started with the Boxster was cheaper, then the Cayman was cheaper, and I think they're back to the Boxster is cheaper. Whatever it is, that's the confusing part here. However, I did some digging with some folks at Mercedes. The folks at Mercedes AMG, they were like, we don't know the pricing yet, because frankly, they don't have control over price in the US. The US folks did. So I spoke to them, and they didn't give me the exact details, but they did kind of look a certain way when I said, is this going to be cheaper because the roof doesn't go up and down? So I'm guessing cheaper. A lot cheaper, probably not. So I'm thinking maybe 160, 170, probably around there to start. The GT 55, let's call that one for maybe 130, maybe 125. You know what, we can play a game in the comments, see how close I got to this. Actually, I don't want to award any prizes, but I will award bonus points. So a couple of important notes. First off, this experience from the inside is one that is very familiar. This is lifted directly from the SL, with one exception. That screen, it does not move, obviously. It doesn't need to move because the roof does not go up and down, so you don't get the glare. I get it. Although I have to say I would like that there, because when I drive the SL now, especially the revised models where the screen comes like all the way here, I kind of like that experience. And granted, I'm still going to renew my request. Can this like slide down so it can be like one old school, like classic car era dashboard? Then number two, I've got to talk about it, the roof. I specifically picked the blue car, I wonder why, and number two, because it has that roof. And granted, it doesn't open, it's a fixed roof, but this is what I've been asking for in cars like these, coupe Bentleys, the GT that came before it. This makes the whole thing a much more open area experience. You don't feel claustrophobic. Then we have to get to the very obvious question. Driving-wise, how does it compare to a 911? Well, there's the obvious, the engine's in a completely different place, so you get a different experience. But something that this retains from the original GT, when you first looked at that car, you felt as if you were going to sit on the rear axle. And the impression was, it's going to drive like Cruella de Vil's car, because it's such a long nose. But then you got behind the wheel, and it was totally different. It was neutral handling. It was flat because the engine was in a place you didn't expect. Same kind of thing here, although this one, it's more, I don't want to say it's more mature than a 911. This is more, if you put it on a spectrum, where there's a GT car over here and there's a GT3 over here, where a regular, like a 911 Carrera 4S, which I would argue this directly competes with, that's kind of like right here in the middle. This one is a little bit closer, not very far, just a couple of steps closer to the GT. So I can't help but feeling that the marketing folks got together with the engineering folks, got together with the business folks, and they all kind of agreed that they want this to appeal to a wider audience. So I will admit, I'm coming away from this experience very surprised. Why? Because I rolled into it thinking this is absolutely going to be an SL with the roof. Instead, this is far more than the sum of its parts, or really sum of its changes. In reality, it's a completely different personality, and more importantly, a different equation. You see, the performance, yeah, it's close to a 911, But by changing the equation, putting in a sortable, usable back seat, not really usable, more usable storage area, this is now, it's not the Pepsi to the Coke, it's the peanut M&M to the M&M. Same family, just different way of getting there, and as such, it would appeal to different people, or really more people. And now we have to turn to the wish list because I've got something pretty sizable to ask. I know we're gonna get a GT55, but how about we skip that, do a GT53, and here's what I'm thinking. A GT that has the inline six with a mild hybrid, so the integrated starter generator motor, put it with the twin clutch transmission, make it only rear drive, so we're talking lighter like the SL43, but tune it to like 500 horsepower and make it the price of like a Carrera T. Then maybe do a differentiation, a second model like a Club Sport, where you lower the weight further and put in like racing seats and different wheels, basically make it a GT3. If you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. And this is the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, if you enjoyed this, highly suggest you watch our SL43 episode. Yeah, I know you're not excited about a 4-cylinder in an SL, but there was a lot of learning from that that went into this. So you can click on that episode here. Till I see you in the next episode, bis später.